So I've always found God to be really kind of funny and playful with the Revised Common Lectionary. And this happens to me all the time. And just like this week when Catherine read, "In the Spirit the angel carried me away to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem." That's exactly what happened to me over the last week. Maybe it wasn't an angel, and maybe it definitely it wasn't in the Spirit, because it literally was there. But as most of you know, or I think all of you know, I just got back from Israel on Friday. And I'm a little bit all over the place because I still have a little bit of jet lag. I want to share some of my thoughts about my trip. I'm going to try to do my best to relate it to our gospel reading today. So first off, my trip was sponsored by the UJA. It's hard for me to say that because in my head, if you say U and A at the end, it's always a G in the middle, moving from Georgia. UGA. Yeah. Which stands for the United Jewish Appeal. We went with other priests and pastors and rabbis. We were also unfortunately supposed to have an imam with us, but he was tested positive for COVID right before we left, and so he was unable to join us. But there was no stated agenda for our trip other than just traveling as brothers and sisters. As our spiritual leader for the trip and my new friend, Rabbi Menachem Creditor, said, the trip was simply about becoming friends on a journey. No matter how we felt about geopolitics, we were traveling as sisters and brothers of faith. Now, when I use the word simply, the trip was simply about, I don't mean as shallow and basic. Often I have found simple can be deep and life-giving if we let it. Simply walking together in the land of Israel and visiting each other's holy sites where our ancestors of faith have walked for thousands of years was certainly more than just simple. It was one of the most powerful things I've ever done. From walking to Razut's tattoos with my new rabbi friends Jeff and Menachem, where Christian pilgrims, including this one, have marked their journey to the Holy Land for centuries by getting a tattoo. Shocking, right? To reading Mary's song, the Magnificat, at the very place where, as the Message paraphrase says, God moved into the neighborhood. To hearing from brave people living out the call to peace. The simple act of being in community is profound and life-altering. When I read the gospel reading for this week, I was really struck about how it spoke to my trip. If there's ever a place in the world that needed healing, it is Israel. I thought about how we went up to the Temple Mount. One of the things that we were told prior to getting off the bus was that we couldn't bring any symbol of faith at all. No holy book, no prayer book, no cross or Star of David, necklace, nothing. Several of my friends even took their name tags off because it said Reverend or Rabbi. As we were sitting and learning about the history of the Temple Mount, we saw a small group of ultra-Orthodox Jews being escorted by both Israeli soldiers and Arab guards. This wasn't necessarily to protect them per se, but really about to make sure that they didn't pray. The answer to the end of violence in the Temple Mount at this point is to erase any visible sign of religious observance. And as we know, it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked in the past, and it's certainly not worked now, because just a few days before we got there was all kinds of violence on the Temple Mount. The deep division isn't just between the different faiths present in Israel. It's even amongst the different observers of each faith. In the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Church of the Nativity, the two churches built over the holy sites of Jesus' birth and then the place of where Jesus was crucified and resurrected. There's a deep divide. The inner space of each church is divided up between different denominations. And over time, there have been massive turf wars. The divides are band-aided together by what they call the status quo. And without going into what the status quo is, I'd say that it's so broken that the simple act of cleaning the space required all representatives of each faith, of each denomination, in armed guards. In Israel, there are great divides everywhere. From the seemingly small and philosophical divides like those found between denominations and of each faith, to the large and very tangible divides, like the walls dividing Israeli and Palestinian territories. But in the midst of the division, there is hope. And part of the trip was for us to experience that hope. So I want to share a few of the hopeful moments. On one of our last days, we visited a location of the hand-to-hand school system. Now let me say, when I got to Westchester, I thought our seemingly infinite amount of small village school systems was absolutely insane. Where I come from, a county is in charge of the school system, no matter what town or city you live in. If you're in that county, everybody's a part of the same school system. Clearly not here in Westchester. But Westchester can't hold a candle to how the Israeli public school system is. They have 5 different public school systems, from schools for the ultra-Orthodox all the way to secular schools. And then you add on private Christian schools. Each system caters to a specific group of people. So because there's very little action between children of different faith and ethnic groups. Not at home, not in school, not ever. But hand-to-hand is different in all the best ways. Each school is made up of children from each of the historic faith traditions. They try to make it as even as they can, but the numbers are numbers. In addition to learning the staples like math and science and literature together, they also separate to study their specific religions. But at the end of the day, they come back together for the kids to teach each other what they have learned. What is beautiful about that is in doing so, well, I mean, there's a lot of beauty to say, but in doing so, there's no shallow denial of the differences between the faiths. Instead, there is a celebration of diversity and a coming together in the fullness of that diversity. The outcomes of these schools is that of lifelong relationships and friendships. And because of those relationships, there's a breaking down of ideological walls held up by segregation and the lack of relationship. We're on the bus. One day, the bus time was kind of wild. We got to share. This is really our time to get to know each other. And my new friend, Menachem, asked me to jump in on his daily Facebook Live to talk about the dwelling place of God. He pointed out prior to it that on a map that there was this neighborhood that was simply called, and I'm going to try not to butcher the Hebrew, Shruna, which means, in Hebrew, neighborhood. So after making a joke about a neighborhood being called neighborhood, he pointed out how Shruna and the Hebrew word for God's presence, Shrina, sound a lot alike. Now, for you guys that hear me preach all the time and how I get excited about the theology of incarnation and God dwelling amongst us, that really sparks something for me. But the good rabbi went on to point out that it all reminded him of the verse that says, "Make me a holy place, and I will dwell among you." And the way that verse is taught in his tradition is that God doesn't reside in the physical thing that we build, but in the building of it itself. That was beautiful. God doesn't reside in the physical thing that we build, but in the building itself. I went on to share our belief that 2 or more are gathered together, God will be among us, and how we are all created in God's image, and the more often we get to be in relationship, the more we see of God. I can tell you, in our time together, God really was present in profound ways. You see, it's in relationships that God is present, not in a building. So I always say, this is the building that keeps the church from getting wet when it rains, or roasting in the hot sun. It is in our holy relationships that God works in this world to bring about healing. The healing of grace and love, the healing of mercy and justice, and ultimately the healing of peace. In our gospel lesson, we see Jesus meeting a man who's in search of healing. When Jesus asks why he's sitting right on the edge of the pool, he replies that he has no one to help him get up and get into the pool. He's made it right to the precipice of healing, right at the edge of the pool, but the lack of relationships keep him from entering into the healing path. In this world, we too are hampered by the lack of relationship. It has certainly gotten worse over COVID, right? In our world, we create plastic peace and fragile status quo from behind our physical and ideological walls. But true healing will always be just out of our reach until we enter into a relationship with those who cross the wall. Now, I know my jet lag has me all over the place today, but let me end with this. I've entered into new relationships through this trip. And it is the desire of those of us who went on the trip to start the difficult work of healing and peace through our relationships. We're still dreaming about what that looks like in the near future, but soon I'm going to ask you to join us. My prayer is this, that when the time comes, that you are willing to step out in faith, pick up your mat, and join us in the building of new relationships toward peace in this world. Amen?
Amen.